So this is what we are discussing about the structure of the lungs. In the lungs, the trachea is divided into right and left bronchi, and each one is again divided into primary, secondary, and tertiary branchia. And again, this tertiary branchia is divided into primary, secondary, and tertiary, terminal, and respiratory branchioles, isn't it? So this ultimately this leads to the a structure which almost resembles like a bunch of grapes, and these are called the alveoli, or singular we can say these are called alveolus. So these are the actual site of the lungs in which the exchange of gases takes place. So when we take air into the lungs, the air reaches through all these primary, secondary, tertiary bronchioles and ultimately reaches alveoli. So this is the site where the exchange of gases takes place. So this is what we are discussing about. And so what are the different steps in the respiration? First one is the breathing or pulmonary ventilation. That means we take the air into our body, into the lungs. And here in the second step, there is a diffusion of gases. And here the diffusion of gases takes place in the alveoli. And during this diffusion of gases, what happens? The oxygen that we take into our lungs will be diffused, and the carbon dioxide that has been brought from the tissues will be exchanged. So that is what we call it as a diffusion of gases. Now the transport of gases, that means the oxygen will be transported through the blood and it reaches the tissues through the blood capillaries. And again, there is a diffusion of gases between the blood and tissues. So that means diffusion takes place at two places. One is at the alveoli, and the second one at the tissues. And this part of the respiration is called the external respiration. That is the diffusion of gases at alveoli. And the diffusion of gases between the blood and tissues, that is the diffusion at tissues, is actually called the internal respiration. Okay. Now, once the oxygen enters into the cell takes utilizes it for the oxidation of energy-rich compounds like glucose, amino acids, and the fatty acids. And this we call it as a cellular respiration. Okay. So I hope you have clear understanding of the different steps of the respiration. And before going into the details, and let us see what are the lung volumes. What are different lung volumes and lung capacities? So lung volumes refer to the volumes of air associated with different phases of respiratory cycle. So how much of air we take in or how much amount of air we send out is called the volume. And the lung capacities are actually derived from these lung volumes. So first we have to identify, we have to measure these lung volumes. Based on this, we can infer or we can deduct the lung capacities. So lung volumes are directly measured through an instrument known as spirometer. Okay. Now this lung, what is the importance of this lung volumes and lung capacities? So lung volumes are directly measured, but the lung capacities can be inferred, and this will give a diagnostic feature for understanding the working of the lung. If the lung capacities are reduced, that means there is some problem in the lungs. Now, what are the different lung volumes? Or we can also say these are also known as the respiratory volumes. In your textbook, it is given as a respiratory volume. And there are four types of respiratory volumes. You can simply remember this as tidal volume or TV, inspiratory reserve volume or IRV, expiratory reserve volume or ERV, and the residual volume or RV. So what is tidal volume? In generally, a healthy human being will respire around 12 to 16 times in a minute. That means he will take and send out the air for about 12 to 16 times. So that is the rate of respiration in a healthy human being. Now come back to the tidal volume. Tidal volume means the air inspired or expired. Inspired means taking in, expired means sending out during a quiet breathing. That means a normal breathing. The amount of air that we take in or we send out is called the tidal volume. And why it is called quiet breathing means no extra effort in taking in or extra effort or forceful expiration of the air. So normal volume of air taken in or sent out during a normal breathing. And it is around 500 ml, almost 500 ml of air we take in or take out during a normal breathing. So this is called the TV or tidal volume. And what is inspiratory reserve volume? You see, I have taken in or I have sent some amount of air, that is the tidal volume. But even after taking some air, there may be some space in the lungs so that I can accommodate more air. So this extra volume of air inhaled after tidal volume is called inspiratory reserve volume. So that means after taking some air, I will take in some extra amount of air by some effort. So this is a maximum effort or maximum inspiratory effort. So this extra volume of air that is taken in is called inspiratory reserve volume. And remember, this inspiratory reserve volume is in addition to the TB. So the what is IRV? IRV is around 3000 ml in an adult male. So this is what the IRV refers to. Now, ERV or expiratory reserve volume. Expiratory reserve volume means extra volume of air that can be exhaled, that can be sent out after a tidal volume. That means I have sent some amount of air, but after that I have some air still in the lungs which I can send out through some forceful expiration, and this we call it as a expiratory reserve volume or ERV, and it is generally around 1100 ml in case of adult male. So it varies around 1100 to 1200 ml of air. So next one is residual volume. Remember, we have discussed about the TV, IRV, and ERV. Now, next one is residual volume. That means even after sending out the ERV, that means expiratory reserve volume, that means forcible expiration after a tidal volume, still some amount of air will be there, and which cannot be sent out. So this is called the residual. That means the amount of air that is left in the lungs after forcible expiration. That means after TV and ERV is known as the residual volume. and this is around 1200 ml. So let's go back. So these are the four types of the lung volumes. These can be measured by an instrument known as the spirometer. So PV, IRV, ERV, and residual volume. Hope you understood each and every term clearly. Now we can infer, or we can um, deduce some important information through this lung volumes or respiratory volumes. Okay, Raghava, don't touch the screen unnecessarily. Okay, next one is the lung capacities. Lung capacities means after measuring this lung volumes or respiratory volumes, we can infer some important information which is known as the lung capacities. And these lung capacities will have a clinical application, and we can understand the functioning of the lung. So we can have a diagnostic feature as to how these lungs are working. So let us see what are the lung capacities. So don't confuse with lung volumes or respiratory volumes with the lung capacities. So these are the combinations of two or more lung volumes. So if TV, IRV, ERV, and RV combined in a manner, we can come to the lung capacities. And these lung capacities are, see, inspiratory capacity, expiratory capacity, functional residual capacity, vital capacity, and total lung capacity. Now let us see what is inspiratory capacity. Inspiratory capacity refers to the maximum volume of air that can be inspired after a normal tidal expiration. That means I have sent out all the air. That means TV. That means I have expired some amount of air, and after that I have sent some forcible with some amount of air with forcible action, that is ERV, and still we can deduce this inspiratory capacity. Inspiratory capacity means, sorry, IRV. Inspiratory capacity means a tidal volume, that is the normal breath, plus extra effort, that is IRV, inspiratory reserve volume, and both combined together gives the total inspiratory capacity of the lungs, that is called the IC. So IC refers to TB plus IR. Okay. Next one is expiratory capacity. Expiratory capacity refers to what I have told earlier, that is the tidal volume plus the extra effort that have put in sending out the air, that is the ER. So ERV plus tidal volume gives expiratory capacity, inspiratory capacity, and expiratory capacity. How much air, the maximum amount of air the lung can accommodate is called the inspiratory capacity. It means the tidal volume, that means during the normal, the amount of air that can be taken in during normal or quiet breathing, plus forcible inspiration, that is IRV. And similarly, we have ERV, that is the maximum amount of air, a volume of air that can be expired after a normal tidal inspiration. That is EC is equal to, that is expiratory capacity is equal to tidal volume, that is X, that is TB plus ERV. ERV means expiratory reserve volume. So amount of air that's sent out. Next one is the functional residual capacity. The functional residual capacity means FRC, means the volume of air remaining in the lungs after normal tidal expiration. That means FRC is equal to ERV plus reserve volume. That means, you see, I have sent some amount of air during normal breath, which refers to tidal volume. And after that, still there can be some amount of air left in the lungs, and that is the ERB. That means this amount of air can be sent out through forcible expiration. And also some amount of air will be there even after ERB, which refers to residual volume. So FRC means ERB plus RB. So don't confuse. EC is equal to tidal volume plus expiratory reserve volume. But here FRC refers to ERV plus reserve volume. Next one is the vital capacity. Vital capacity means the total capacity of the uh, lung without residual volume. What is the vital capacity? The tidal volume plus IRV plus ERV. All the three volumes, if you add, it gives the vital capacity. That means the amount of air that can be accommodated in the lungs. Next one is the total lung capacity. Total lung capacity refers to the addition of all the volumes. All the volume means the VC. VC means the tidal volume, IRV and ERV plus the residual volume. So that means all the volumes added together, you come to a capacity known as total lung capacity. If this total lung capacity minus RV is equal to vital capacity. So first three volumes, that is the tidal volume, IRV plus ERV refers to the vital capacity. If we add all the capacities, it refers to the total lung capacity. So don't confuse with the respiratory volumes and the lung capacities. Okay. So next one is the exchange of gases. So now this is the important part of our topic, the how the gases are exchanged. We know the gases are exchanged at 2 points, one at the alveoli in the lungs and second at the tissues. The first part is known as the pulmonary ventilation or the external respiration. So respiration includes two phases or two parts. One is called the external respiration. That means the ventilation of the lungs. That means the amount of air we take and there is a diffusion of gases. Since oxygen is the major gas in the intake air, automatically the pressure of the oxygen will be more and there is a simple diffusion of oxygen from the alveoli into the blood. And in the blood already, which comes from the tissues, it carries carbon dioxide and carbon dioxide is exchanged or diffused into the alveoli. And from the alveoli, oxygen is diffused into blood. So this is known as the external or the pulmonary respiration. Why it is called pulmonary respiration? So a pulmonary gases exchange. Why it is called external respiration? Anybody? Can you tell me why it is called external respiration? It is called as external respiration because there is no release of energy during this phase of the exchange of gases. That means in the alveoli, we are not getting any energy liberated or energy is produced by the oxygen or oxidation of the food materials. The oxidation of food materials takes place in the tissues at cellular level only, and hence it is known as the diffusion of gases between the blood and the tissues is known as the systemic gas exchange or internal respiration. And this gases exchange depends on various factors, and these factors can be identified as following. The first one is the partial pressure. A partial pressure refers to the pressure of an individual gas in a gas mixture. That means the air we take into our lungs consists of many gases in addition to the oxygen. So each gas will have certain pressure in the total pressure exerted by the amount of air which we take in. So automatically what happens, the partial pressure of the gas is a very important important factor that plays in the diffusion of the gases. And not only that, the solubility of the gases. Gases are soluble in the liquids. So this solubility of the gases is also important factor. And next, the thickness of the respiratory membrane. The alveoli are having a single layered squamous epithelium. So the blood capillaries, which come very closely, which come into a close contact. So there will be a single layered cell membranes. And this thickness also plays very important role in the exchange of the gases at the lungs as well as at the tissues. At the cellular level also, the capillaries and the cells will have very close contact, and there is an exchange of gases because of the very thin membranes that is the endothelium of the blood capillaries. Endothelium refers to the wall of the blood capillaries, which is very thin, and also the plasma membrane, which is very thin. So the thickness of the respiratory membrane also plays important role in the exchange of gases. And now the surface area. The surface area refers to the amount of area which is in contact with the air. So surface area also takes a very important role in the exchange of the gases. And the distance of the diffusion. So how much distance it has to travel, our distance of the diffusion also important factor. And now let us see different gases are there in the air, but most importantly, the oxygen and the carbon dioxide are the important gases that will be exchanged during the respiration, and how the partial pressure of these gases plays important role in the diffusion. So remember, the partial pressure of these gases plays very important role in the diffusion. You see, the oxygen has atmospheric in the atmosphere. The concentration of the oxygen is around 159 mm of Hg. The pressure will be measured in terms of mm of Hg. And once it enters into the alveoli, the partial pressure will be 104 degree, 104 mm of Hg. You see, so if you see at the same time, the carbon dioxide partial pressure is only 40, and its atmospheric pressure is 0.3 mm of Hg, very low. And because of this high partial pressure of the oxygen, there is a diffusion of gases from the alveoli to the capillaries in the lungs. So it is the pulmonary capillary, and this is the alveoli. So this is the inspiratory air, and the volume, the partial pressure of the air, that is the partial pressure of the oxygen in the alveoli is 104 mm of Hg. But if you see the carbon dioxide pressure is only 40 mm of Hg. That means there is a diffusion of oxygen into the capillaries, and the carbon dioxide, which is having a 40 mm of Hg, will diffuse through. So oxygen enters into these capillaries, and carbon dioxide enters into this alveolar cavity. So this is the second step of the respiration, which we have identified earlier. So next, in the blood, once the oxygen enters into the blood, that means in the capillaries, its pressure will be around 40 mm of oxygen. And during this transportation, its partial pressure will be 95. Again, in the tissues, you see it is having only 40 mm of oxygen. So, at the same time, if you see the carbon dioxide in the tissues, in the cells, the carbon dioxide is having high partial pressure because of the oxidation of the food materials. The carbon dioxide will be produced and it is having higher partial pressure at the tissues. You see the conditions. The partial pressure of the oxygen and carbon dioxide are reverse in case of tissues. And because of this, what happens? The carbon dioxide that is in the tissues enters into the blood and the oxygen in the blood enters into the tissues. So because of these partial pressures and pressure gradients, the pressure gradients at the alveoli and at the tissues are different. Remember one thing, at the alveoli, the partial pressure of the oxygen is high, which facilitates the diffusion of oxygen from alveoli to the blood capillaries in the pulmonary at lungs. At the same time, the partial pressure of the carbon dioxide is more in the tissues, whereas the partial pressure of the oxygen is very less. And because of this, the carbon dioxide enters into the blood from the tissues, and the carbon and the oxygen enters into the tissues. So these are the two inverse conditions at lungs and the tissues. Okay. Now this is the cross section of the alveoli along with the pulmonary capillary. And remember, this is a very thin layer of single layered membrane consisting of squamous epithelium. The alveoli is having a thin layer of squamous epithelium. And if you see the blood capillary, it is also having a single layer of endothelium. And in between these two, there is another layer called basement membrane or basement substance. So these are the three layers that are present in the diffusion in the alveoli, where the diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide takes place. Okay. Now this is what we have already discussed. The oxygen from the alveoli enters into the blood, and carbon dioxide from the blood capillary enters into the alveoli. And between these two, there is a basement membrane. Okay. So what is this layer? This is the squamous epithelium, and this is the endothelium of the capillaries. So these are the membranes that are present in the site of exchange of gases in the lungs. Now we can see here what we have discussed is just a diagrammatic representation. The inspired air, the alveolar, the partial pressure of oxygen is 104. At the same time, it is 40 with respect to the carbon dioxide. So oxygen enters into the pulmonary vein and carbon dioxide enters into the alveoli, which is expired. Now this pulmonary vein is taken to the heart and through the systemic arteries, the oxygenated blood will be distributed to the tissues. During this process, the partial pressure of the oxygen is 95, whereas the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 40. Okay, and at the tissues, what happens? The partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 45, and the partial pressure of oxygen is 40. So which means the carbon dioxide, which is high in the tissues, will enter into these capillaries and oxygen will enter into the tissues. Again, it is transported to the alveoli through the systemic veins and again through pulmonary veins. So this is how there is a exchange of gases in the alveoli and at the tissues during the transportation of oxygen and carbon dioxide.